All right, coming off a solid weekend for the Mets, are they going to add to their roster on the trade market? We'll talk about Tyler McGill, Lindor, Rojas, McNeil, Conforto, Stroman, Dom Smith, Zack Scott. It's all coming up on this episode of the Shea Anything podcast. It starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. It's Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you on this episode of the Shea Anything podcast, which you can subscribe, rate, and review Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate it. And it's also brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on. It's only on Verizon. So, Andy, you had some reporting. One of the few players in baseball, very good players in baseball, where every time I read his name, it's a headline about somebody being angry at him. Josh Donaldson of the Twins. The Mets are, according to you, interested. This is a real name to watch. I saw you say that on Baseball Night in New York on Friday.
Where were you Friday?
Well, I just watched it on my DVR.
No, well, where were you? I just showed up and there was Sal.
I was home and my future in-laws met my parents for the first time. We had dinner. So I was off for that reason and to be there instead of being in studio with you.
Was it like Father of the Bride where your dad snuck in a room and got chased by dogs and bit?
It was not like that, although I love that scene, but no. So I guess
Josh Donaldson is what you're trying to get at.
Yes, I have an opinion about it, but also I have questions. My opinion is, are we 100% sure the Mets need a position player? I would say no, I'm not. I don't think they need one. However, is the inclusion of Donaldson because the Mets covet one of their starting pitchers and they would take him?
No.
So they want the player?
No, not necessarily. Let me back up on what I reported, because aggregation turns into a game of gradual misinterpretation. So what I reported was the Mets obviously having one of the worst offenses in all of baseball, despite the fact that the team is winning. They see the one area of potential trade upgrade on the position player side as third base. And they have talked to the Twins preliminarily about Josh Donaldson. So that's what's true.
So
if they're going to upgrade a position,
it's like best available. It's like the best available player might be Josh Donaldson. We should look into it because he's a good player and better than what we have.
They just look around the diamond and see that if there's one area where they could trade to improve, it would be third base. So third base is where to watch if they're going to try to help their offense.
So this isn't a if you want Edwin Diaz, you gotta take Robinson Cano. If you want Jose Berrios, you take Josh Donaldson.
No, Berrios would be tough because they don't want to give up prospects. I'm not saying it's impossible, but no, they what I know is, as I said, they look around, they say, we have one of the worst offenses in baseball, but we're locked in. Your shortstop doesn't hit, but you have to keep him around for, I guess you can release him in about 7 or 8 years, but until then you're stuck with him. You look around, obviously, with second. I don't have to go around all the positions. Our listeners know who plays which positions for the Mets.
Right.
But third is the one where you have a little flexibility. And it wouldn't break their hearts to move J.D. Davis in a deal. It wouldn't break their hearts to keep him either.
Right. It's a good position. That's kind of why I'm just so used to trade deadline arrives. You're like, okay, what position are we not great at? What position do we have a need? The Mets are a first place team and they're a good baseball team. So they don't have a glaring weakness, I would say.
Other than hitting,
other than scoring runs. But when I say that, I don't know, it's a weird combination. I know it's their weakness statistically, but I don't think if you talk to me in August that it will still be their weakness.
Maybe not.
That's just my sense. I feel like the guys will start hitting. But I wanted to, in a question I want to ask you about Zack Scott, Andy. I was on my Time Hop today, which if any listener is unfamiliar, it's an app that just keeps track of all your social media and what you were, or your photos, what you were doing a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago today.
Oh, horrible.
No, I love it. I look at it
What if
and
something
I'm like,
tragic happened 3 years ago today and you have to be reminded?
well, then I like knowing that it's the 3-year anniversary of something tragic, or that 8 years ago, I was doing something like, I don't know. It's a good reminder.
But pictures of someone who's dead and it's painful to think about.
Well, that happens. But 3 years ago, this is not nearly as morbid. I retweeted 2 Laura Albanese tweets, and they're just fascinating to revisit. So this is 3 years ago. She said, Rico says they're looking at a short rebuild to be competitive by next year. Rico says moving a Syndergaard or a DeGrom doesn't necessarily preclude a short rebuild, but it will require high caliber MLB returns. All right, so let's think about how far we've come. DeGrom's one.
Do you remember when we argued about this and I said you can't trade DeGrom and you said they should?
Well, yeah, I was on the record being like, I think a rebuild's the smart thing to do.
I was like, DeGrom's too good. You don't trade him.
Well, you weren't saying DeGrom is a Cy Young, multiple Cy Young winning pitcher.
No, I was saying you cannot trade Jacob DeGrom. He's too good. Come on, give me credit where due.
Okay, you get credit. And I was saying the Mets should rebuild. And I remember eventually getting to, like, I forget when it would have been, towards the end of the season, because it really felt like a good run there at the end, that like, okay, the Mets made the right call, not blowing this thing up. But anyway, I just was reminiscing about that and how different it feels right now, not just because the Mets are in first place, but because, to my earlier point, it really feels like I don't think this roster long-term needs a lot. However, I agree with something Zack Scott said, which was, well, he's not taking their names out of the mix for somebody like Jose Berrios, like a top of the line rotation guy, but he did say it could be good to just get somebody in who can help. And you've been making the point, Andy, for a couple of weeks that somebody like Jay Happ makes sense for this team. Do you see the Mets wanting to go in that direction, or do you think deep down they want to go for a World Series and like get a top flight rotation guy?
I think they want to go for a World Series, but that doesn't necessarily mean getting a top flight rotation guy. Jay Happ, unfortunately for him and the Twins, has been really quite bad lately. So maybe not that specific guy. If Michael Pineda were healthy, that would be a really good choice. A mid-backwards. Berrios, by the way, would be the 4 in the Mets' current rotation.
I know. Yeah.
So he's kind of in that conversation too, just with a higher prospect cost. Obviously, Carlos Carrasco's July will go a long way toward telling the Mets what they need, and they know that. It's hard to determine. I know Zack Scott said yesterday that basically have to plan. He basically said we have to plan for no Carrasco or Syndergaard because there's only one trade deadline, which was interesting because what I've heard from other sources is that they really want to see how Carrasco comes back, or if. And
he's throwing and running.
Yeah, but it is July 6th. And the deadline's on the 30th, so he doesn't have a lot of time to show what he has this year in the major leagues.
Which might be why, Andy, that they're thinking of just bringing him back as opposed to stretching him out. Like that they want him to, they want to see him for 2 or 3 innings as kind of an opener, like instead of sending him on a rehab assignment, so that they know what they have by the end of the end of the month.
So that'll determine it. But what I'm told is they don't want to trade their few good prospects that they have. I say, well, what about Ronnie Mauricio? I asked a source, the shortstop. You have a shortstop for the next decade. And it's like, we feel like he's developing his power, could become a corner guy, at which point he has more trade value. We might as well wait till he develops the power, trade him then if we're going to trade him. Or keep him, and maybe he's a third baseman in a couple of years. Either way, now's not the time to trade him. The variable, which is significant, however, is that, I felt that when ownership that I always covered with the Mets, I knew how to gauge, well, they've done this in the past, so it's an indicator of what they might do in the future in any number of behaviors. With Steve Cohen, who's a very involved new owner, who smells a possible World Series run this year, 5 minutes before the deadline, could he be like, trade them all, I want Mike Trout? Maybe, that's the one that we really don't know. So I would never say never on anything. Well, they wouldn't do this, or they wouldn't trade Brett Beatty, who's the third baseman out in Brooklyn. Steve Cohen could press the button on anything big if he.
Imagine how badly he wants to win a World Series.
In year one, he could retire from from owning the team.
Imagine how awesome that would be for him. Like,
and for Sandy Alderson, who's not going to work that many more years in this business to get his second one, bolster his Hall of Fame case.
It's beyond like the fandom part. Like, yeah, I know Steve Cohen's a Met fan. I'm not even talking about that. But like, to buy the team that you've been a minority stake owner in and to win the World Series in year one, like if I were him, would do anything I possibly could to make that happen. Now, I wouldn't mortgage the future, because if I'm putting myself in his shoes, I'm a good businessman. I am not. Doug Williams is not. I am notoriously bad at investing. But Steve Cohen, being an actually smart businessman, is not going to trade the entire future just to make himself feel good. I'm just saying it would feel really good.
I'm sure it would. I mean, a big part of Cohen's purchase of the team and emergence as a public figure after being this very, very unpublic, famous person for 30 years is to have a great reputation and have the public love him and get good replies on Twitter. And all these things would be accomplished instantly if he were to win the World Series in year one. It would be an amazing story. So yes, I agree so that's why you just never know who's like the most exciting pitcher. I guess there isn't really like an ace type pitcher available to deadline. I guess that's Berrios as the top pitcher. He's not that great, but anyway, if there's a splash to be made as we get closer, maybe he'll force them to make it. All he has to do is tell Alderson, Zack Scott, and the baseball people to do something that they don't want to do, and they have to do it. Obviously, that's the way it works.
Well, the reason that I'm excited for the rest of the month, I don't think this necessarily pertains to the Mets, but it could with like a Chris Bryant, because the Cubs are in an absolute, they're in a free fall. Could the Braves trade Freddie Freeman knowing they can afford to sign him next year?
Wouldn't that be
that would be pretty awesome. I was listening to Howie and Wayne talk about this. I think it was on Friday or it may have been Thursday. They were talking about how the Braves might try and avoid the Albert Pujols thing, just like the Cardinals did with Freeman. It's his second big contract. And I don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting month because there are teams with huge valuable commodities who may eventually sell those pieces.
Keep in mind, just to add to that, Cespedes wasn't available until the morning of the trade deadline, the year that the Mets got him. So it's very hard to say what sexy move actually ends up being possible.
Right. Once again, you're listening to the Shea Anything podcast. It's brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. All right, so let's do 3 battle rules, some quick hits. Andy, I could not believe the combination of Garrett Cole and Aroldis Chapman in game 1 of that doubleheader. You cannot paint a bleaker picture for the Yankees than those two guys deserting them, than the fact that it's kind of glaringly connected to the sticky stuff, and it just all felt so dark from that team's perspective. And then you look at the Mets, Pete Alonso hits that home run, and he's pumping his fist around first base, and it's Yankee Stadium's erupting with Met fans, and it's like, this is, and Jeff, you can bleep this out, but this is any Met fan's dream of like.
It's probably a bleep.
Yeah, it's probably a bleep. But the Mets are making the Yankees like look worse than they did when they woke up that morning. Like, it was like they're exposing the Yankees' problems, and I cannot remember the last time that happened.
Well, the Red Sox did, and the Angels did. Maybe the Yankees are just bad.
Right. It's true, but that felt like a rock bottom for a team where they keep setting the bar each night. But what were your takeaways from that series, Andy?
From a Mets standpoint, just they're hot. They're good. I mean, I should say that Chapman is not believed to be a spider tack guy. He's actually just, it is even more mysterious what's wrong with him.
Or he's like missing a fingernail, isn't he? So
yeah,
that might have something to do with it.
Or maybe there's something else going on that seems sort of ominous on that front. But from the Mets standpoint, it shows you that they're on a better roll right now. That's all. That's what I'll say. That's a generic sort of comment, but I think that's all it really does show. I was talking to a Mets person the morning of the first day of the Subway Series. It was supposed to be the first day, Friday, and that person was saying, we have like the same amount of wins as the Yankees. Why? Almost defending them. Like, why is Hal Steinbrenner have to speak? Why is Aaron Boone in trouble? And my response to that person was actually because it's just very clear momentum-wise. You guys might have the same amount of wins, but you're going up and they're going down. It just is. It feels that way. And this was after, the Mets. Excuse me, this was Thursday because the Mets had just been blown out in Atlanta, and the Braves had just lost. And the Yankees had just lost that Ohtani game with a rain delay. And it's just like, even like you just both had horrible losses, but the Yankees' horrible loss was so much worse. I think it's just a Mets year or first half of the year. They're not a significantly more talented team, but they've just got the mojo.
Yeah, I mean, that I had completely forgotten about that Ohtani loss.
That was rock bottom, more than the Subway Series.
I mean, that was awful. But anyway, so those are some Subway Series thoughts. Only good things for the Mets. Although they didn't sweep the doubleheader, they, as I said, exposed the Yankees' issues even more so than they had been. Tyler McGill, Andy.
Tyler.
I said Tyler.
Tyler. You have to really.
Do you really have to emphasize, or can you just trust that I said it quickly, but I said Tyler? Like I'm saying Tyler. I'm not saying Tyler. I'm saying Tyler.
Yes, Tyler. There you go.
Okay, so Tyler McGill.
There it is.
Have you been as impressed as Luis Rojas, for example, in terms of not only obviously his ability to throw a baseball, but also his ability to kind of step up and seemingly be unfazed by the pressure of being suddenly in a rotation of a very good big league team?
Yeah, he's coming out hot. I know the Mets feel like they're getting a little lucky there for now. Not sure how long it'll last. Peterson has the same demeanor, but ultimately is being undermined by his lack of elite stuff. So I think you ride McGill until it doesn't look like this anymore.
Is there any chance that he's
good, but he's not great?
Yeah, that's what. No, but how would we know? Like, would you have called Jacob deGrom great after his start against the Yankees? I'm not saying they're the same guy. Look, I'm just saying that like when before McGill's first start, I think it was Anthony McCarron on the show who did a kind of a scouting report on what he knew about this guy. He said he's got a pretty good fastball, good changeup, good off speed. Mm-hmm. He's an unheralded type prospect. I think he's 26 years old. And I was thinking, man, I mean, it does sound a lot like Jacob deGrom. No pressure, Tyler.
It's Jacob deGrom.
When are you supposed to know how high the ceiling is for a guy like this exactly?
I don't think this is a ceiling guy. I think this is a solid guy. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, it's like the Mets had no idea what he was going to give them coming up. It's like, that guy, we need someone, and he's pitching well and double and triple A this year. And now they're like, okay, we've gotten lucky with him so far, and we're impressed by his demeanor, and his stuff is good. So going forward, you see how far they can ride that. That's what I'm saying.
I think they should give him a $200 million extension. On to our third of the three batter rule, Andy. This strikes me as something that you will, not calling you a contrarian, but you will play one for and on, okay? Francisco Lindor and the bunting. It is...
contrarian?
Well,
what's the contrarian position?
Let me make my point, and you can make yours.
Okay.
I keep wondering when it's going to stop. I think like a lot of Mets fans, I just wonder, it's like, okay, we get it. Like you can bunt, you've got good speed. You're still able to do the little things, but you're not making little things money, Francisco. Please stop bunting. And it makes me worry a bit about where he is mentally. Like, does he think of himself as the guy who moves a runner over? Because if he does, then that's really worrisome. Is that, and Andy, I would say, just because you follow zero people on Twitter, maybe you already know this, maybe you don't, but I think Mets fans are ready for the bunting to stop collectively.
I did not know that.
Would you say that consensus is correct or incorrect or somewhere in between, or an overreaction or a proper reaction?
That sounds like a proper reaction to me. The look, I understand the idea of you're not hitting, try to contribute, do something, but it is happening more than you would expect from a guy making that much money. And if someone's out there going, what does money have to do with playing good baseball? It's like, because you get paid that money to drive in runs, be the guy, and it's a lower price point to purchase a punter.
Well, yeah, there's a certain part of me that when I see that, I'm like, how different is this player than Andres Jimenez? Because they're both switch hitting shortstops, and one of them I'd be fine with bunting. The other refuses to stop bunting. I have not seen a lot of power from Lindor. Look, I'm not trying to be Joe Mets hot take artist, but I am saying that, like, at a certain point, you want to, if you're a Met fan, watch Lindor and watch him do amazing things like Padre fans get to do with Tatis. Andy's point last week on the podcast was that both of those contract extensions were irrational. Okay, so you want to take it for what it is. Yeah. So then, when are Mets fans going to be wowed? Like, they have not been wowed. And a bunt is Lindor basically saying, I, in this position, don't want to wow you. I want to move the runner over. And I thought Josh Satin, friend of the show, friend of ours, tweeted, it's not that it's a bad baseball play, because it's not. But if he's the guy they hope he is, when they gave him all that money, he should be confident enough that if he swings away, the worst case scenario is he can move the guy over with a ground ball to second with a chance in an RBI.
That's perfectly said. I completely agree.
And I think that's a former big leaguer explaining it perfectly. That
I can't add to that.
In a big league clubhouse, guys like Josh Satin would look to Francisco Lindor to do something different in that position. I think that speaks volumes.
And guys like Francisco Lindor would look at Josh Satin and say, what's your name? Joe? Jerry? So yeah, I'm sure he appreciates the feedback.
It's like, all right, Andres Jimenez light. Okay, 81 games. We're officially at the first half mark. We're going to do glass half full or glass half empty. And we're going to list through those names like I did at the top of the show in the cold open. So let's start with Lindor. Andy, are you feeling glass half full or glass half empty?
I think it would be hard to feel glass half full. I understand he's been better lately, but obviously nowhere close to the guy that we were just talking about. Who you said is Francisco Lindor going to thrill Mets fans? I would say the question is if, like, will that happen? So glass half empty so far with Terry Collins. If you DVR'd our show on Friday, you saw Terry had a great answer. We put him on the spot. It was like one word for Lindor's first season, and he's like, improving. And that's true. So we'll see. Terry was more glass half full, or just understanding that he's not going to be Terry Collins on television saying something.
I will say, too, like, I can't claim to have watched him every day in Cleveland. And the numbers recently, like, if you do the baseball reference, like, you know, you grab 20 games or something and you look at the numbers. Yeah, the OPS is over 800 during that span. And that's good. Like, that's the only way he's going to get his numbers back to respectability after the beginning of the season. But are you really paying $341 for an 800 OPS? Or are you paying for a superstar? And I can't sit here and say he was a superstar in Cleveland. I watched him all the time, and he's not one now. It's possible that this contract, to your point last week, but beyond the big picture kind of context of your point last week, it's possible that this deal was a mistake in terms of this player's just never going to be that middle of the lineup, big spot, Mike Piazza, Carlos Beltran type. And instead, he's got a great and loud personality for your organization. He's always going to be a good spokesperson, but he's a decent offensive player. Like, I don't know. Is that all true? I don't know.
All those things are possible. Yeah. I mean, he wasn't a great spokesman on Raccoon Night.
That's true. But I will stick to my point that he thought it was obviously a joke and that no one would take it seriously, and a lot of people did. All right. Half full, half empty, Luis Rojas.
150% full and overflowing. Star manager.
I think Zack Scott's answer was pretty telling. And again, none of the people in the Mets front office had to like him or keep him. And obviously there's no guarantees in life. If the Mets spiral out in the second half, maybe he's not the manager next year. But it seems like they are impressed by his ability to collaborate, his communication skills. Zack Scott, basically, it's the old, who was quoted as saying, like, you want to, it was a Brody quote. Like, you want to,
when he explaining why I didn't hire Girardi. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to.
You want to be able to exhale. Wait a minute. You want to be able to exhale when you walk into the manager's office rather than inhale.
Right, and that is a perfect way to put the Joe Girardi fist clenching mood that he's seemingly always in, compared to Luis Rojas, who is just a good communicator and doing a really good job at the end game stuff.
Can you imagine if the Mets had hired Joe Girardi, like so many
something
people
again that I was wrong about?
My God. What a disaster that guy is.
I thought at the time they needed a proven big league veteran manager, and I just didn't know enough about the guy. I thought he was in a bad position maybe with young players with the Yankees and didn't handle that great, but I still thought he had the capability to do it, and he's just such a tight ass that it's problematic. 2 beeps in one show. Well, I think... Is that a beep, Jeff? No? We're going to... Yeah, that's...
Oh, hey, I like it.
How about that?
That's exactly what he is. And it just goes to show once again that like I didn't remember that you were into this actually, so I wasn't commenting on you. I was commenting into how it became like a thing among online Mets fans. Like, this is obviously the guy. How could it be anybody else? Because people don't like him. And now that he's not, Mike Harkey, the bullpen coach, is a big stabilizing force for him. He's like a cool guy. I helped him with players. And one thing I've observed from some Yankee people is that without Mike Harkey in Philly, Girardi's just indulging all his worst instincts and completely going off the rails.
And you knew a lot that I think the average person didn't. You reported it at the time, and you did everything you could to get it out there.
I wasn't keeping it to myself.
Right. But I'm just saying that if you didn't read what you were writing at the time, maybe you just didn't know that Joe Girardi was this much of a disaster behind closed doors, and you thought, won manager of the year, he won a World Series, let's hire this guy. But anyway, that's the past. Jeff McNeil, full or empty?
I guess full. Well, I'm like 60%. I don't know, more than half empty. He's a good hitter. He'll probably figure it out. I like him defensively sometimes too, quite a bit. By the way, he makes some cool plays.
Conforto, is your glass half full?
Are you just interviewing me?
No, I'm giving my take on some, but not
selectively. All. Who called?
Yeah. I briefly just got a call from the building that we have a delivery.
Okay. That's exciting.
I'll go get that shortly. Maybe that's the reason I didn't answer the McNeil.
Maybe you were distracted.
Okay, Conforto, full or empty?
Full. He's really good. It's not a fluke that he's been really good for quite a while, right?
I agree. I think, you know what? I agree with your assessment that he's really good. I would say I am a little worried with what he's dealing with, both in terms of basically starting from scratch again physically, while also dealing with the fact that each game, each series, he's playing for a contract, and he's a Boris client. He's a player rep. He knows the magnitude of what he's playing for. And I think that, we talk a lot about, is it a physical or mental problem? It might be both for him. Not to say he can't handle it. He can, and he's a good player. I just think right now he's shown me very little to make me think, other than that base knock last night, that he's,
I got to start watching his at bats more closely to let's come back in a week on that. To be honest, the Yankees have been such a bigger story because of their organization falling apart, that I've been watching their games with so much more scrutiny than the Mets games for the last few weeks. So I'm interested to look at him a little more closely. You've reminded me to.
Marcus Stroman. It's an interesting inclusion in here. Half full or half empty, Andy?
I'm a little worried about the hip, because that's a major thing to have a little issue with. It can be a major. I'm not saying it's a major thing with him, but that concerns me a little bit. Otherwise, half full.
Yeah, I would say the way he's pitched this year would make you think half full, and he deserves half full to be the answer. But moving forward with Stroman and Walker, I would have to say for the reason we're calling this segment what it is, I would have to say half empty for both of them, because I think their tanks are half empty right now. I think they have given a lot and pitched really well. And I think it's unrealistic to expect them to perform this way. Like they'll have blips. I think the hip issue is certainly legitimate to bring up.
Season in a few years, right?
Yeah. Stroman didn't pitch last year. Walker doesn't have it on his track record that he's pitched a ton. So it's nothing against them personally, because I think they're both really good pitchers, and I think they'll be pitching in October, no problem. I just think getting there after they've basically held this team on their back for weeks and weeks and weeks, I just don't expect it to continue the way it has for a couple months, because that's just the way it seems to work in baseball. At one point you're doing great. At one point the pitching staff's holding the team up because the team's not scoring runs. I think August is going to be a different month and moving forward.
One of the reasons everyone's like, oh my God, Walker didn't get any offers. And one of the reasons is teams didn't think he could pitch a full season because he hasn't for much. And we're going to see now if those teams are right or wrong.
Dom Smith, glass half full or half empty?
I got to take the slight qualifier that I took with Conforto. I want to zero in on the Mets a little bit more this week with the Yankees on the West Coast than I have been. So let me get back to you on that one. I know he's been hitting breaking balls a little bit better, which was the weird thing because he's so good at that last year. And I think there's been concern certainly around Smith among evaluators that I don't want to say concern, but just a question like, how close is he to that 60-game guy versus he got hot? And then how close is he to the borderline everyday player-ish that he was before that? But with Smith and Conforto, let me watch him a little more closely this week. It's been so all Yankee all the time.
I would say I am pretty confident that it's half full with him. I think he's starting to remind pitchers and maybe even himself of the hitter that he is. And that is probably not the 60-game guy. It's not the first month or so of this season guy either. It's somewhere in between. But his ability to not just learn a new position on the fly, but really start to excel at it. And I think that's taken a lot of his brain power away from being the offensive player that we know he can be. And hitting breaking balls, again, that's something that I just have all the confidence in the world that he'll start to do. He'll excel at that again. And he's already had a good month of July. I'm looking at it right now. 5 games. Last 5 games, he's 8 for 18 with 3 homers and 7 ribbies. So he's just swinging the bat well, and he sprays it to all fields. The power, it's there. Zack Scott, Andy, do you know enough to give a glass half full, half empty right now?
Glass is overflowing, just like it is with the manager. He's doing a tremendous job. I really, so much better than Sandy Alderson ever was at GM at one particular skill, which is important in today's game, which is working at a faster pace, working the waiver wire, figuring out who's been DFA'd, making little trades, releasing guys, evaluating guys quick enough to cut bait with them if they're not working out. Sandy was not working at that pace when he was GM. He was more deliberate, and I'm sure even he appreciates that he's got someone under him now running the day-to-day who's able to have those relationships and have that awareness and do that kind of stuff. So he's been, the question with Zack Scott was going in. The reason they hired, I think we might have talked about this a little last week, but the reason they hired Jared Porter was that he was scouting and analytics, both, maybe even a little more scouting. And Sandy was trying to get away from the analytics only piece that he was identified with. Zack Scott was like the Red Sox analytics guy. So when he got the job through unpredictable circumstances, it was, does he have the emotional intelligence to connect with people? And the early returns on that, I think, are very good. So he, almost like with Roja, it's weird. They stumble into both of these guys through 2 different personal scandals with Beltran and Porter. And I think they've ended up in a good place with the people in both jobs. It's so far from guaranteed that either will be in those roles next year, but they're doing a great job right now.
I thought it was interesting. You talk about the shrewd, like on the fly, fast paced GMing that Scott is doing. When they DFA'd Jared Eichhoff, I was like, you don't have the ability to do that. Like, what are they going to do? Mm-hmm. They need the warm bodies with big league experience, even though Jared Eichhoff is who he is. And they got him back because I'm sure they had a good feeling that he would clear waivers and come back. And they haven't, like, those are the types of things, even though he was a player in the Mets organization, that I just feel like he's got it all under control in terms of piecing this together. And he's probably through the worst of it in terms of doing that anyway.
He handled that really well, that period of time on injuries. And it's a tremendous improvement on, in addition to, like, the Sandy Alderson front office previously was like Alderson, JP Ricciardi, John Ricco. They kind of needed a guy of the next generation who had those relationships. Jared Porter was that guy. Perfect for that. And now Zack Scott is proving to be really good for that too. But when it was just like Sandy and Ricciardi were coworkers and friends for decades, it's really good to have some fresh blood in there. I think it's really helping the Mets.
Just a reminder to subscribe to the Shea Anything podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening. We appreciate it. Rate us and review us as well. We've gotten some really good feedback lately, some positive reviews. We really appreciate you all listening and taking the time to leave those. A reminder that the Shea Anything podcast is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets. From the network more people rely on, it's only on Verizon. Andy, thank you. Look forward to reading your stuff this week. You can check out Andy's work on SNY.TV, some of the trade deadline stuff as we look ahead to the rest of the month of July. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will talk to you later this week.